This is the Franchise QB Podcast, where we empower entrepreneurs to win big in franchising. We huddle up weekly to educate our audience about the most successful small business model ever created, franchising.
Welcome to the Franchise QB Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Halpern, a 20-year industry veteran and entrepreneur. My mission is for listeners to achieve their American dreams of creating wealth and independence through franchise ownership. Every week, we speak with franchisees, franchisors, or vendors that support the industry. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. My guest today is John Mollica, co-founder and president of My Franchise CPAs. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks, Mike.
So today we'll discuss your company, My Franchise CPAs, which provides world-class tax planning and financial strategies to franchisees from start to exit. How did you get your start in accounting? Let's start there.
Sure. So actually, I started pre-med. I wasn't even going to do anything in accounting or finance. I from a young age, I had like an affinity for kind of financial stability, security. That was something that was important to me, and so I think accounting made a lot of sense. So I took my first accounting class. It really clicked for me, and here I am.
That's cool. So how did your accounting career end up kind of weaving its way into the franchise industry? I always like to ask, because franchising casts such a wide net, and I started in a completely different profession. I was in internet marketing until I found my way into franchising. How did accounting lead you to the franchise space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I started this firm with my business partner, Jason, we didn't say from the get-go, hey, we're going to be franchise accountants or anything like that. But an old connection of mine from my previous employer, he ended up going working for his family business, and they provide services to franchisees. So when he found out that I was opening my own firm, he reached out to me and said, hey, we have a lot of franchisee clients. They don't have a lot of support on this end. Would you be willing to take on like a client here or there? And it really just, we've been here ever since.
Interesting. So you recognize that in a lot of franchise systems, there's a gap between the services that a new franchise owner expects the franchisor to provide and what they actually provide. So was that kind of the impetus for leaning more into the franchise space and kind of saying, we know that there's this kind of disconnect and we're here to kind of fill that void?
Yeah, it built up over time, but we learned from asking a lot of questions and from working with a lot of different brands. We found out that all brands kind of offer different things. A lot of franchisees, when they're starting out, this is the first time they've ever owned a business. So there is a really gap in expectations between what they think they're responsible for and what the franchisor is going to be doing for them. And what they're actually going to need to do on their own. And so what we've been able to do is kind of step in and fill the gaps there on the tax and accounting side.
Yeah, and we're going to get into those specifics here in a moment. But I think the overarching question that most new franchisees would have is working with a company like My Franchise CPA. Would your clients expect to get a better return on their investment using your guidance in these different disciplines?
Absolutely. And again, the majority of the prospects that we come in contact with and our clients, this is often the first time they've ever owned a business. So they really don't know what they're responsible for, what strategies or what abilities there are that they can use their business for example, reduce their taxes. And there really is a lot available to them that was not available to them when they were like a W-2 employee. So absolutely, there's a lot that we can do to help.
So, with that said, let's jump into it and kind of go chronologically through the type of services you provide when a new owner kind of joins. So, the candidate will vet the franchise. They go through a process, as we know, that could take months to identify the right fit. They find their franchise. They make the investment. Now what? So Business formation services. Tell us what you can do with a new franchise owner to help them get off the ground with formation services.
Sure. So, depending on what route the franchisee takes to get started to fund, the three most common options we see are an SBA loan, ROBS funding, which is through a 401k that they set up, and self-fund. So we're familiar with all three options and what makes sense for them in setting up their business, depending on the option. As an example, if they do a ROBS, they have to create a C corporation, and typically the ROBS provider is going to do that for them. So we might not do that, but that same client might not know how to create a DBA and need to do that on their own, or they might need to figure out the licensing that they're going to need for that particular brand where they are. If they're doing an SBA loan, they can create an LLC, a corporation, it's up to them. But they're often not going to know, like, well, what would make sense? What's going to put them in the best position tax-wise? So we come in and help them with that entire process of creating their business, getting their tax ID with the IRS, their EIN, their DBA in their state, and determining what the licenses are that they're going to need to operate.
So I know you're based in Florida. Can the candidate or the client be anywhere in the country?
Absolutely. We have clients all over the country.
Okay. So generally speaking, when a new owner joins, they're engaging your services right around the time that they join the franchise system. Would that be accurate?
That's right. Yeah, we can help right there as soon as they get started with their franchise.
Okay. And I know you just walked through a few different services, but can you give us an idea of what the investment would look like from the franchisee side to engage your services for the business formation stuff?
Absolutely, and it really depends on what extent we're getting involved. At the most basic level, if we're just creating their business, like their LLC, it could be a few $100s. If we're creating their business, getting their DBA, their tax ID, the licenses, and even providing them some tax guidance and starting up, kind of what they should be aware of, a little bit of planning, that can run a couple of grand. So it just depends on what they're looking for.
Okay, makes sense. So let's move on to the next phase. So now the business is up and operating. Let's talk about accounting services that you can provide to new franchise owners. What types of services do you provide on the accounting side? So let's start with that.
Sure. So depending on the brand, there's different requirements that the franchisee is going to have for accounting. There are instances where the franchisor is going to actually do their accounting or have a required accounting or bookkeeping firm. On the other end of that spectrum, the franchisee is on their own to figure out their books. So again, it kind of comes back to we'll come in and fit where the need is. But if we're doing their bookkeeping, we would help them to establish that initial account, typically on QuickBooks online. That's like the main preferred brand that we see the franchisors are using. Once we've established their QuickBooks account, then we'll update their accounting on a daily or weekly basis. We will do a month-end close. We'll put together a financial reporting package for the franchisee and send it to them. And then me or my partner will have like a CPA meeting with the franchisee to walk through their numbers line by line so they understand how are we doing? Are we making money? Are we losing money? Where could we improve?
So that's generally a monthly check-in unless the client asks otherwise.
Yeah, we will sometimes do a quarterly if they don't need as much of a frequency in touch, but they still kind of want a check-in to make sure that they're staying on top of things.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in the first year when they're trying to sort it all out. They've worked on their personal stuff, but now they have to work on their business stuff and the differences they can see there. So when you're starting to get into that month in and month out relationship with the owner, how does that go from a cost standpoint? I'm sure a lot of this it depends on the service plan, but what, generally speaking, if they were to hire you to kind of do their bookkeeping and check in on a monthly basis, what's that gonna cost a client?
Sure. So on the low end, if we're doing like a quarterly check-in, we'll typically be about 500 a quarter. If we're doing the daily and weekly books, the monthly meetings and financials, that will typically be about 500 to 600 a month. And that's for startups. Now, it's a lot different if we take on an existing franchisee. They've been in operations for a few years. There's potentially a cleanup if they have not been staying on top of their books. That happens. And then depending on the size of the franchise at that point, it can be more.
Makes sense. So let's kind of transition into the next phase, which is tax advisory services. Can you explain the type of advisory services you offer on the tax side to franchise owners?
Sure. So on the tax side, there's a few different things. There's tax returns, their annual returns for themselves individually, and then their business return, depending on if they're an LLC, a corporation, an S corp. They'll have a different return that they need to do for the business. So we handle that. We can do 1099s if they use subcontractors. That's pretty common in the franchise space. We will do their sales tax if they sell like a tangible good or a taxable service, depending on the state that they're in. And their quarterly estimate. So as a business owner, if they're profitable, they're supposed to be estimating a certain amount that will be due at the end of the year and paying that in quarterly chunks throughout the year and revising that investment. So that's more on like the compliance side. And then we also do tax planning, and that's where we determine based on their specific situation, their profitability, what's available to them to actually reduce their tax bill at the end of the year. So there's certain strategies that may benefit them in that sense.
So that would be like the work opportunity tax credit or a qualified business income deduction, or Section 179, where you can depreciate an asset in a more accelerated pace than you used to be able to do previously, those type of things?
That's right. Actually, just earlier today, I delivered a tax plan to a client, and a couple of the things that you mentioned, I incorporated into his plan. So the work opportunity tax credit, bonus depreciation, making it an election for his LLC to become an S corp for taxes. And when I put together that plan and added it all up, it's going to reduce his tax bill by about 30 grand this year.
That's great. Yeah, that's exactly the type of strategy that a new owner needs. And I understand you work with existing owners as well. So that's kind of a quarterly review, you would say. I mean, you mentioned the estimated taxes, so I know that's on a quarterly basis. But for your tax advisory clients, is that generally a quarterly check-in?
Yeah, so we do it a few different ways. We could do just an initial plan. So we'll put together a tax plan. This is what would make sense for the franchisee now. We can implement the plan. So depending on the strategies that we suggest, our team will actually go and put forth like the documentation or apply for anything that's required to actually generate the savings that we show them the plan. And then the most or the highest level of tax planning services where we'll do a quarterly meeting. So we'll continuously update their tax plan each quarter.
Yeah, makes sense. So, and again, I'm always curious about the cost structure. So if someone's doing tax advisory with you, how does that cost structure look like for an owner?
Yeah, so that's a little bit different from the other services on tax advisory. We look at it again if we're going to do just one initial plan or if it's like a quarterly. So there's that. And also how complex of a plan would we be able to put together? So if it's a really basic, like a startup, and there's only a few very basic strategies that would make sense, that would be 3,500. A more complex plan where we're going to put together some more advanced strategies for the client, that can be up to about 8 to 9 grand.
Okay, thanks. That's provides kind of good range depending on the needs.
Yeah.
So, outside of those three categories, are there other services that your firm provides to franchisees?
Sure, there are a few, and they're very specific to the franchise space. So that FDD that the franchisee gets, if they like, what we do is we'll take the FDD, pull out all of the financial components into a spreadsheet, and then go line by line and explain to the prospective franchisee what are they going to be responsible for in paying, what does that look like,
Now,
what
is that
goes where.
generally for item 6, item 7, and item 19, as well as the exhibits?
That's correct. Yep. Those items, and we also will go ahead and look at the franchisor financials, the audited financials at the end. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I had a client ask me about that the other day. They were validating franchisees' earnings, which is very commonplace. You want to talk to as many owners as possible to get a
right,
pretty good lay of the land as to how the system's performing. There's always going to be a top performer, a bottom performer, and people in between. But is
right.
there a problem with the franchise system overall? Because that's hard to fix. And yeah, so he was asking me how important is the financial health of the franchise system, and I think it's very important because if you have healthy franchisees and an unhealthy franchisor, that could ultimately lead to some issues down the road. So you do that with your clients. You look at their audited financial statements and then give them kind of an overview as to what you see and if there's any red flags there.
That's exactly right. Yeah, at very least, I mean, we're not providing investment advice at the end of the day. We're not saying this is a good investment, this is a bad investment, anything like that. It's so subjective. It depends on the location. It depends on so many things. But at very least, what we aim to equip the prospective franchisee with is information. When they
Okay.
look at a set of audited financials, they really don't understand like what that all means. We do, so we can at least break that down and explain like, hey, they're profitable, they're not, they have more, debt or liabilities than assets. That's something to be aware of. They're brand new. They just opened this year. You know what I mean? Like there's
Sure.
certain things that are relevant to know.
Yeah. So beyond the FDD review, the franchisee generally, and in most cases, if they're getting a loan, they're doing this before they get to you, or maybe not. But they have to put together a pro forma, which is going to be based on a lot of the data they collect by looking at competitive FDDs in the same space, by looking at their franchisor's FDD, by talking to existing owners and trying to model it out. Is that a service you provide too, is to kind of look at what they've done and kind of clean it up?
Yeah, we'll what we do is we take a look at the pro forma that they put together and say exactly that, to potentially to clean it up, to see is there anything here that really doesn't make sense. And sometimes it could be a simple thing like a calculation. They might have a franchisor provided like a template, and then the pro forma financials, and the information just is not feeding over correctly, or there could be a certain expense line that has not been completed and really should be, things like that.
Okay. And then do you also provide like a cash flow analysis in the example? And I do a lot of resale work with clients that, instead of a startup territory, they want to take on something that's already open and operating. Do you participate in evaluating books of an existing business and making recommendations maybe on valuation or cash flow analysis?
Yeah, so we do, and what we do there is we'll take a look at the prior three years of tax returns, and for the current year we'll look at the internal books of the prospective seller, or if there's a buyer, they'll sometimes want us to look at the seller's numbers, so the same thing. And from there, we're able to determine, based on the EBITDA of each year and a multiple, what would the SBA be willing to lend on a business like this that were to be sold. And it is a good, I mean, I know there are buyers and sellers out there that will more like a handshake basis decide to sell or buy a business. We recently had a client that was close to doing that, and they were going to pay 100 grand for a gym, a small gym
Okay.
franchise, an exercise coach. And we did a cash flow analysis, and it turns out that that gym wasn't worth close to that. And so when they provided our analysis to the seller came back and reduced their asking price to 20 grand from 100.
Interesting. Well, that's really valuable. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, you have a new client that comes in, a potential franchisee client. How do you kind of size up their situation and determine the services that they need? I mean, do you do it like, obviously when they're brand new, they're going to need those formation services. Do you kind of go through like an analysis of where they are and figure out what your service plan is going to look like? I guess just explain what an initial consultation looks like with a new potential client.
Sure. And we look at it as there's really three main phases that we look at. They're either like a brand new startup. They're just kind of starting to look at brand options. They're looking at funding options. They're about to fund. They're about to open. So they're at that point. So those are two, and then three would just be they're already in existence and operating. When they're brand new, we want to understand what exactly have they kind of where exactly are they at in that process? Have they decided on a funding option? If they have they secured anything yet, any kind of relationship or started that process at all? Have they decided on a single brand? Are they looking at multiple brands? Do they have an FDD in hand? Have they signed it? Do they have a franchise agreement? So that's all going to determine when it makes sense for us to kind of come in and help. And typically, if they sign the FDD, if they have been pre-approved for like a funding option, the next thing that we would typically do is go, okay, it's time to set up your business. So we would start with their LLC or corporation. If they are about to open, then we focus more on what are they going to need in terms of bookkeeping? Have they already established an accounting, like a QuickBooks accounting system or not? What are they going to need in terms of taxes? And at that point, I'll also ask them, in addition to this franchise, what else do they have going on? Because they'll often have like another business, or they'll have a full-time job, or different a rental, different things that are relevant from a tax standpoint. So then I can kind of build out a clear picture and figure out what they need at that point. And if they're existing, it's similar, but there we want to look at their books. We want to see what is the condition of the business to today, to see if they need a cleanup, and if they're profitable, do they need a tax plan? So yeah, it really depends on where they're at.
Yeah. So the idea is to help them with whatever they need now, but build a long-term strategy to assist the client beyond year one and kind of have that ongoing relationship into however long, they're in business.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So can you provide, I know you did previously, but can you provide us with some other examples of how one of your clients, that owns a franchise faced a challenge specific to the franchising space and how you jumped in and helped them solve their problem?
Anything in particular, like in starting up with accounting?
Well, you mentioned one before about how you were able to come up with a pretty big tax savings for a client. So that's a pretty good case study. Any other case studies that kind of come to mind where you were working with someone and they had an issue and you were able to just kind of, find them savings somewhere, or just kind of get through a challenge that they had faced that they just couldn't figure out on their own?
Yeah. So, and we do a lot of tax plan. So when we do a tax plan, we'll often find that what's available to them they are not doing. I actually just met with another client and delivered his tax plan that I put together. In his case, he's opening up a medical spa, and he didn't know, kind of what's available to him to reduce his taxes. Because he's opening and operating this year, he didn't realize that whatever he invests now into that med spa would actually combine from his LLC to his personal income and actually create a refund back from what he already paid during the year. In his case as well, he had a question about vehicles and what he's allowed to do there. And because he has a home office and he's going to go to a physical location, a medical spa that he opened to work, he's able to claim each trip from home to the medical spa as like a business trip, whereas typically you wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, so you're able to identify a lot of the nuance and how to use that to the advantage of the franchise owner to just help them save money and make their lives a little bit better.
That's exactly right.
Very cool. So before we wrap up, anything else that you want to mention that we didn't cover today?
I mean, I think we covered pretty much what we do. We are working on a lot of different things. We just launched a Q&A that we're doing for franchisees. Right now it's like a closed Q&A, but we're going to want to open that up and just give franchisees the opportunity to ask any financial tax questions that they may have, and they have a lot, especially the startups. Just an opportunity to come and learn from us. So that's something that we're working on, and it's pretty much it. Yeah. Hey, it's December, so this is actually a great time to think about what can you be doing here at the end of the year to reduce your taxes. What can you invest in? What can you prepay for those franchisees out there that have like rent or insurance, anything that you can prepay that creates a deduction for you in the current year. So just a couple things.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of that from candidates that are looking to make an investment before the end of the year for those reasons. So that's great. Well, I appreciate your time, John. And if you would like to connect with John to learn more about the services that My Franchise CPAs offer, you can contact John directly at john@myfranchisecpas.com. or contact me at franchiseqb.com or on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB. I'll get you in touch with him. Thank you, John, for taking the time to get in the huddle and speak with us about My Franchise CPAs.
Happy to do it, Mike. Appreciate the invite.
Thank you for listening to the Franchise QB podcast, where you're at the helm of your future as a franchise owner. If you enjoyed the content, please rate the show and recommend it to anyone that might be interested in franchising. Make sure to visit franchiseqb.com to subscribe to my newsletter and for an actionable playbook to go from walk-on to legend in your new business. Follow us on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB and join us every week for a new episode. See you next time.
Visit franchiseqb.com to take the next step of your journey towards wealth, independence, and franchise ownership. And remember, when working for the man gets old, you must do something bold. Thank you for listening.